For decades, Tasha Mercedes Shelby has been proclaiming her innocence in the death of her 2-year-old stepson before somebody finally believed her. Her doctor, whose own testimony sent the young woman to prison for life. She was 25 years old, by the way. The former Mississippi State medical examiner, Dr. Leroy Reddick, R-I-D-D-I-C-K, 2017 he testified, and he said, I made a mistake. Yet Tasha Shelby, still remains behind bars this morning in the Correctional Institute of the Central Mississippi. Her story mirrors uncounted others who have been convicted of a homicide crime alleging a child died of shaking baby syndrome. But advancing pediatric medicine now suggests that those kids may have died from medical conditions. Basically, is the more we looked into it, or the more the medical industry looked into it, there could possibly be something else other than what is labeled, and I don't think anybody reading all this material here has a complete and definitive explanation on shaken baby syndrome. No one shook this child. No one abused this child, said Valena Beety, and Valena will be joining us in a moment or two, Shelby's attorney. The jury was relying on the wrong information. Shelby's story begins in Biloxi, 1997. On June 1st of 97, Shelby was sleeping in her bedroom when there was a loud thump that awakened her. Matter of fact, let me switch over here because I've got the actual court records here. This is the Court of Appeal filing from the state of Mississippi, and I just want to mention, because this is not from a news reporter, this is coming from actually the case information, case number, and all of that. The judge, the jury, the attorneys, etc. And I'll read a little bit of this just to give you some background on our interview coming up in a moment or two. In 1997, 2-year-old Brian Thompson IV died of a result of multiple force injuries to his head, caused significant bleeding around his brain, massive swelling of the brain. Tasha Shelby, who was engaged to Brian's father, claimed that she was awakened by a big thump about 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning and found Brian, the 2.5-year-old, lying on the floor of his bedroom. Shelby was the only adult at home at the time, and Shelby was indicted for capital murder. She was convicted and sentenced to imprisonment without parole following a jury trial, and the court affirmed her conviction and sentenced on appeal. 2015, Shelby filed a motion for post-conviction relief. It did not work out. In May of 97, Shelby and her then-fiancé, Brian Thompson III, were living together in Biloxi. They were with their newborn baby. They had a newborn baby. The newborn baby's name is Devon. Shelby's 3-year-old son, she had a 3-year-old son, and his name was Dakota, and then Thompson's 2.5-year-old son, Brian. About 7:30 p.m. on May the 29th, Thompson left to go to work. He worked at night. Shelby's grandmother, Honey Salk, and Salk's husband, Don, came over to Shelby's house about 8 p.m. to pick up Dakota for an overnight visit to their house, the other child, Dakota. The Salks stayed there for about an hour, and then Honey testified that Brian played happily. She saw Brian then. He was happy throughout their visit, and that she did not notice any marks or any bruises on him. And according to Shelby, the mother, she gave Brian a snack, put him to bed, and the Salks left, took Dakota with them. Shelby told the law enforcement that she was awakened by a big thump about 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and according to the mother, Shelby, she found Brian on the floor of the bedroom, and it appeared to be having seizures and was not breathing. She called her husband, Thompson, at work, told Brian that he wasn't breathing, that she could not get through to 911 operator. Thompson immediately returned home to find Shelby standing in the doorway holding the 2.5-year-old stepson, Brian. Thompson testified that Brian appeared, quote, pretty much lifeless and limp and blue as could be, end quote. Thompson laid his son on the floor, attempted to administer CPR. He then decided to take Brian to the hospital. When he asked Shelby whether they should call the hospital or 911, she said no. Thompson told Shelby to get Devon, that was the baby, so they could take Brian to the hospital. Thompson testified that he actually bumped Brian's head the 2.5-year-old child, who was unconscious, slightly on the door of the van as he put the child in the van. Thompson told Shelby to continue to try to administer CPR to Brian on the way. They did note later that he mentioned during testimony that the bump was slight, apparently not doing any additional damage, but we'll get into that and some other questions on this one. But the doctor, before he died, the pathologist, the forensic pathologist, basically said he made a mistake, but at this time, she stays in prison. What's the update on this? We will find out from these two ladies who are front and center on this mission. At 7:20, coming up next, Valena Beety. She's Deputy Director of the Academy for Justice, and also we'll have in the house Renee Moore-Smith.